presentation about cluster systems versus centralized systems based on requests from stakeholders among us who are particularly interested in pursuing those. Many of those stakeholders were not satisfied with that information, and they'd like to discuss it further with the Stantec team. So our proposal is to hold an off-line meeting. Anyone on the will inform the panel. The panel will be invited, and it'll really be a chance to really go into, do you multiply this by 10, or is there some less expensive way, or how else might we think about this, or all of that, so we can really they can spend a little bit more time to really make sure that idea has been fully vetted. Okay, and we'll report back to the panel what comes out of that conversation. Is that plan acceptable?
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to proceed at this particular point in that issue, Stacy, and I'm sure you're willing to accept any other input as to what the content of that meeting or what questions might need to be answered.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so for that reason, we're going to stop. We're not going to try and discuss that any further today, and we're going to move on to our next agenda item. So we're going to quickly move through the next two sections of our meeting. The first is Sia is going to talk a little bit about demonstration pilot and selecting sites for demonstration pilots and the methodology that they are developing for that purpose. And again, just to be clear on the goal of this conversation is just to introduce to you this approach, this methodology, and get any preliminary thoughts you have about the methodology. And there's going to be a lot more time for conversation about both the methodology and the actual analysis within it much later on. Okay? So with that.
So as a general principle, it's good to know why you decided to do something. Why I feel like it's good to be able to point back to the decision that I made and what data I would use to make the decision and what I prioritized. And so selecting the demonstration project locations is a very important step in our whole success, really, of doing this adaptive management. And so we, not as part of this phase of work, but as part of the next phase, we are going to select demonstrations, and there's a number of factors that go into that, and one is the site selection. The other is the regulatory and permitting issues. You know, are we really able to do these things? The design, we need to get to design level, first at a conceptual site and then at a preliminary, which is a more detailed look at what the design is going to be. And then we need a schedule and a budget. And so that is how we are going to try to fund the demonstration. We have to have that level of detail and a budget as opposed to a planning number. And that's really the next phase of work. So the goal is to have a warrant article for town meeting that will fund doing this next phase of work. It is so important that we are systematic about this, that's why we've created what I'm about to show you, which is a tool for making good decisions. And as you'll see from what's in the tool, that the level of good information is going to give us good answers. So it is very, very important to have as good as possible, the information that is as good as possible. And the hope is that we don't sit in a room and add these things up, but that we actually create a technical subcommittee with ground field experience and expertise in the town of Orleans to do the ranking that I'm about to talk to you about. And so with that, I'm going to show you a preliminary look at what we're calling a site selection decision support tool. And what it looks like is this. We have one of these for every technology. PRBs, aquaculture, coastal habitat restoration, and flooding constructed wetlands. There are 3 categories of criteria. And for the PRB, we have some related to whether the site is suitable. So for example, I'm just going to walk through these ones. are the shoreline conditions and risk for site suitability. Are we going to get saltwater intrusion? Groundwater profile, how thick is the aquifer and what is the depth to groundwater? Are the results transferable? Things that you guys brought up about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. How replicable are the results from this site going to be to other locations? Are there utility conflicts? Are we going to have to disconnect and reconnect all kinds of water lines and everything else in the road to actually put this PRB in? How easy is it to access the location we're talking about? And what is the result in terms of dollars per kilogram? Is it a good bang for our buck? So those are site suitability criteria. There are probably ones that we missed, and that is the point of bringing it up and giving it to you on a printout so that you can be thinking about it, and if there are other site selection criteria, you can recommend those to us. Under permitting, one of the things that we've heard, and I think is really significant, is that we've got an ACEC. We want to be outside that, probably, for a PRB demonstration. We don't want to demonstrate something when we're not sure what might happen. And then upland areas are corollary to that. Upland areas are not in wetlands, so we don't have that level of uncertainty going into really valuable, fragile, sensitive ecosystems. Abutter compatibility is going to be important in the sense that we want to make sure that the people who are affected are comfortable and not just maybe supportive, but at least not unsupportive of having this kind of thing happening near them. And then there's the issue of property ownership. It may be that for a demonstration, you really want to make sure it's a town road, where as you're rolling out other projects, if they're so good, if they work as well as we're hoping, it would be worth taking that next step to maybe talk to people about property issues. And then,
including acquisition cost.
right. Right. So it's the idea of property ownership for acquisition costs, but also just for ease of doing the project. And then the last set of criteria are the ability to evaluate the project. This is a science experiment, and we all want to make sure that we can see the results and deconvolute different variables. And so having a fewer number of variables in terms of the percent of the watershed load, the overall ease of monitoring, and the access to good well locations. We want, I think, from a siting for a demonstration, to be able to watch our experiment as conveniently as possible, because that will let us see things quickly and conveniently. And so those are the criteria. And again, I'll show you, I'm not going to go through all of them for the other ones, but we're trying to develop what's important. And then the other critical piece of this is a weight. So we've got a criteria, but they're not necessarily all equally as important. So I did a first cut at weighing the criteria, and I put the ones that I thought were the most significant on the top and went down. But this could change. We could reshuffle this, and people could say that, the accessible well locations is actually more important. But, just as an example, and so this technical advisory group would help with the criteria, and then, of course, with the weighing of that criteria. And we can even go to finer grain. I went 1 to 5, 1 to 10 may be more appropriate. This is with the understanding that all of these make the cut at a certain level in terms of it's likely that we could do these there. Mike?
Real quick, just what you said. Any one of those could be a fatal flaw. We're not going to include criteria and give it a ranking of 1 if, in fact, it's a fatal flaw and you can't do it. So just keep that.
And so what you've got is a matrix that starts with these down 2 columns, and then across you've got your sites. And so for the PRBs, we've got a bunch of sites, and more are bubbling to the surface thanks to you guys thinking creatively about where PRBs could go. And here are our sites. For PRBs, we've got Rock Harbor, a couple there, Town Cove, a couple there, Lonnie's, and Pawa, because those are the ones we've come up with. And so then this all rolls up together into a matrix. And so this is hard to see, but this wasn't to talk about more than in general terms. You've got the same criteria, and then you've got your criteria ranking. And then, which you should be able to see, right here is a rating. It says rating and score. And it's that way for each of the different potential locations. So each site has a rating in terms of each of these criteria, and then a score, which is the product of the criteria weight and the ranking. So I'm going to say that again. You have a score that if you multiply the criteria weight and the ranking, that's what you get. And so this is where I'm going to emphasize good information in will give us good numbers out. So deciding how the shoreline is for the PRBs, what the groundwater profile is, what's the abutter compatibility. Those are all real questions that we have to take the time to answer. And when we do, just as a preview, you get a filled-in chart that magically gives you numbers at the bottom that help you look at, relatively speaking, which site seems to make more sense. And it's a really fun process to go through, and it's a really powerful process to go through because you have sort of gut feelings about certain things. But then when you start enumerating them sort of systematically and objectively, at the end of it you can say, okay, they're all kind of close. Why is that? Or one really stands out. Why is that? And you also have here, which I didn't talk about, other overriding considerations. So if there is, as we're going through these sites, a non-starter, you can give it a weight of 100, and that'll change the game for any one of these technologies. And so this is a tool we're developing it. We'd love your feedback. I'm going to briefly show you that we've got one for aquaculture with different criteria that you can actually read, thank goodness, on your printout. Coastal habitat and reef site selection, and floating wetlands. Similar criteria, some uniqueness to each one of them. Rankings are given, and with that, I'll take a couple of quick questions and just want to show you where we're going.
So first questions. Any questions about this? Jeff?
Yeah. The PRBs, for all of these, I'm wondering what sort of help are we going to have from people who have experience in similar situations locating these things so that we take advantage of, I mean, just for example, okay, if we go up to Wellfleet, there's experience in Wellfleet. They've had some people in to set up oyster reefs, aquaculture setups. They seem to know, they've had some success. They seem to know something about where these might work better or not. I think it would be helpful to have input from those kinds of people for floating constructed wetlands, aquaculture, maybe even PRBs, who say, look, you know, from my experience, these are, you know, I'd give it a different weighting. I mean, my weighting, you know, I don't have an experience in it, so I don't, you know, this might be just fine. What are we going to do to bring on, I guess, expertise, if you will, experience in doing this, so that we have the best chance of getting it right in terms of the rating system and also in terms of final siting.
I'm looking at you. You're looking at me.
If you want to take a stab, go ahead. But that is a very good question. To date, we've been sort of relying ad hoc input, as Sia has talked to everyone. You know, she's talked to the Wellfleet shellfish people, Anna Maria and Kurt and Rick, but it's been ad hoc. As we go into next fiscal year, as we look at the warrant articles, one solution to this would be a technical advisory panel. It's very common to have this kind of effort, this kind of initiative, have a technical advisory panel that would include the kinds of people we're talking about, the national experts on these areas, preferably with Cape Cod, obviously, background, that are brought in at the beginning, chartered from the beginning, and engaged in support of this activity over the next year. So that's something, it's relatively low cost because you bring them in just when you need them. They provide that high level expertise and review of the whole process. And and I think that's one way of doing it.
I'm not trying to minimize your contribution. It's just that I think that this
No,
is
no.
this is
That's
important
common.
important enough.
I didn't notice till you said it.
I was just wondering if in the review of available sites, there was consideration given to those sites that had a potential regional opportunity for a pilot project, meaning something that would cross town lines.
We have not identified sites outside of Orleans. If you'd like to recommend some, by all means.
I
Part of
can
what this
recommend
process
one
is
for
about.
Eastham. You know, we're looking at Salt Pond as a potential pilot site for a non-traditional in conjunction with enhanced traditional improvement of a septic system at Salt Pond Visitor Center. So that's a discussion that we've had at a very preliminary level internally and also involved the commission. We met with them. Mike's aware of that. You know, I think that is it's a federal facility, so we all own that. And I think that it leads to one of our priorities, and that's engaging the Cape Cod National Seashore in discussions towards the solution to the problem. And I think that would have a regional benefit. It's all part of the same estuary that we're trying to address, so,
So what
you
would be
know.
really helpful is if you send the like the street, to Stacy or just directly to me, the streets where you think these PRBs would make sense. And then I can look at them in the watershed MVP and determine, have a look at the
Great.
nitrogen reduction and, just kind of do that preliminary calculation.
I'm curious even more broadly, just maybe as a process point, as we think about demonstrations, that we need to demonstrate all of these technologies in Orleans, whether there's another way of thinking about it. Maybe we do need to demonstrate them all in Orleans, but even if we do, if there are pilots of these technologies happening in other places on the Cape, do we want to at least be in coordination so that we know what theirs really looks at, they're going to learn more about this part and we're going to learn more about this part, right? And so there's actually, it might influence our, the way you think of which one to pick. Well, this one is very much like the one they're trying in Brewster, but this one's got some different configurations and we'd learn something different. Maybe we should try to,
So maybe
however you want to think about it.
a criteria is
And so I just, that seems like something that would be important to consider.
Sure, thanks. The commission's has a monitoring committee that's been meeting, and Tom Camberry's been heading that up. And they are tackling right now the question of what criteria should we establish for identifying good, pilot demonstration projects going forward. So we hope to be a warehouse of that information regionally. To the extent there is federal and/or state funding, which there might be for pilots, I think those criteria, will come into play at that level. And finally, yes, we do believe that towns can rely on pilot projects in different areas to the extent there are similar characteristics. We should all be able to gain from pilot projects in the region.
Comments. One of the things that is becoming obvious is that this will be multiple demos or demonstration projects or pilot projects. They mean different things, pilot, demonstration, but there'll be multiple, especially if you look at something like aquaculture. Aquaculture in Nauset or Mill Pond is going to be different than aquaculture in the river or other parts of Pleasant Bay or in Aries Pond. Doing a demo in one doesn't mean it's going to apply someplace else. So for aquaculture, we're probably looking at more than 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. Same thing for some of these other technologies. Sia can correct me if she sees it differently, but that's a fact. We're probably going to be having not 2, but maybe 6 or 8 of these demo projects over some period of time as the budgets and other things, as other projects come into play on the Cape where they they've had similar kind of conditions with work plans. Maybe we use that for a year and then fine-tune it as it might apply in some area in Orleans. So it's going to be a iterative process. But there's going to be multiple projects, and it's going to be a budget issue because they're not cheap. The other thing is, Jim, if you want to comment on that.
No, go ahead.
The other thing I want to point out on this, as we go through this, one of the things that this really helps, it allows you to do a sensitivity analysis, because there's always differences of opinion as to which criteria is the most important. I can look and I can say, well, gee, I think performance ought to be a 5. What we can do with this is quickly test the sensitivity. We can switch it to a 5 and see if it flips the sites. And then, if it does, we know we need more information on that particular criteria, because it's sensitive to that particular criteria, so it directs our data collection programs, because we know that that is a critical factor. That's what this does. If there's another criteria, doesn't matter whether it's a 5 or a 1, and it doesn't influence anything, then we know we can take our focus off that and not worry about it. So this is a really good tool, and I want to just emphasize Sia's point about the documentation of the process here, because it's not just all back and forth and, you know, why didn't we do this? There's an actual documentation as to how you thought, why you thought, and the data to back it up that supports that conclusion going forward. So.
Yeah, it would seem to me that with the 208 process, that the county has some skin in this game with the non-traditional pilots. Wouldn't they have some money to help us out with these pilots?
The first federal money for funding some pilot projects is coming through the Southeast,
Southeast New England.
Thank you, Southeast New England. It's a regional program that EPA has been administering. Actually started in Rhode Island. Senator Reid obtained some funding for the region. So they're looking to do 2 pilot projects, at least at the design level. One of them may be a PRB. There's also money in the budget from last year that was appropriated at the state level, and we'll see, hopefully the new administration will actually fund that, but that was, I believe, $4 million to come to Cape Cod to look at pilots and demonstrations as well.
Is the process clear yet as to how to access?
So the SNCC work money, the Southern New England money, that process has already gone out for requests, and EPA is considering options going forward. So that's a federal money. The state money, like I said, was identified in the budget, but would need to be made, the administration would need to identify it for actual spending.
Who is requesting the money for the Southeast New England initiative?
They
what
went
kind?
through the estuarine reserves, so the 2 projects, and I don't have a lot of details about them, but one is in Hyannis.
Are these public entities, or are they environmental groups, or are they, is it open to municipalities?
Tom, are you familiar with the
Yeah, they are.
process?
So Chatham and Barnstable and a number of other towns applied for the funding. Did you get your funding through that, Sia? I'm not sure. For the IA
Yes, we did.
systems. Yeah.
Falmouth received a grant to do IA
IA system. So it's
demonstration.
it's filtered. I don't know. So it's goes from Chatham all the way to Narragansett National Estuary Program and Budget Bay Coalition. So they're all in that as administrators of the funding that comes through that program. Southeast New England,
Who would you contact? on
Coastal
this?
Water.
Is that
They come out as RFPs.
said,
They come out as RFPs.
It's an EPA administered
Okay.
program. And because the federal fiscal budget for next year was basically a continuing resolution, we're anticipating that same pot of money again next year.
Inherent in one of these criteria you have, is there the concept that you have some control over the variables that are inevitable in any one body of water. So I'm thinking, let's just take a hypothetical. Lonnie's Pond is a fairly small entity compared to Town Cove. Does it make more sense to put a permeable barrier near Lonnie's Pond than it does in Town Cove, where you have so many different
So that is the project evaluation percent watershed load at max size. That is exactly that question. Can
Okay.
you, and I learned this from doing demonstrations in Falmouth, that if you have such a high load, that any non-traditional technology you put in is going to have such a small impact that you have no chance of seeing an effect at a sentinel station or an effect in the change of concentration.
Yeah.
That's not ideal.
Yeah.
It's not an ideal way to do a demonstration. Ideally, you want to do a demonstration where you can
you
know.
can see the effect.
Well,
Or
you
measure.
have to do a whole bunch of things, upstream, midstream, downstream, cross-stream, 3 different depths, to see what you're seeing in a local, in localized in situ. But I think it's a conversation that's just starting today, and that we want to get into details at the next phase of planning. But I think what we've recognized is we need to do demonstrations, and we need to be very intentional about the sites we select and the criteria that we use to select them. And we want to bring in other experts who may help us evaluate how to run these experiments. If there were demonstrations of these already, I would know about them. And so part of it is we want to bring people who have scientific expertise who can help us design the experiments as effectively as possible.
Since we're running up against town meeting and warrants, how much time do we have to do this?
That's a Mike question.
So I think what the,
Just to be a little practical.
well, I think what the question is,
5 o'clock, yeah.
I think what the question is what is the nature of what you would ask for at town meeting? So how far do you need to get between now and then?
Unless they'll give it to
And
us for free.
just to, Mike, do you want to say a little bit about that, what you would?
I think that is the question of the day. John and others have already said, Mike, start focusing, and we're focusing, and we're starting to put together from general lists to annotated scopes to more detailed scopes of these things. As the stakeholders focus on these things, they're in the pipeline.
But so, just to be more specific, what Mike had said to me earlier is, the goal is not to have you select the demonstration sites between now and town meeting. The goal is that is part of what would be, that you would support money to select the site and implement the demonstration project, right? That's,
Number one on this is the idea is funding to develop the scope of work, which is
Got
what
it.
we need to do.
right? Jeff?
Yeah, I've been, I've thought quite a bit about that town meeting and so on. And I've also followed quite closely what's gone on here over the last 2 or 3 months. I think we need to get realistic about what we're going to have for town meeting, what we can reasonably approach a town meeting, and I think it's things like pilot projects where we're confident that we want to go ahead on certain things, and the other topic that comes to mind is some of these sites for disposal or treatment to do the to pay for the work that it's going to take, because we're going to need that information in order to have a real plan. And I think perhaps the complexity of this, I think, is far more than what many people perceived it to be, and I think it's going to take us a bit of time, and we ought to have patience in the process. I think we've done quite well to get where we are with what time and effort we've put into this. But I'd like to see us put some things forth at town meeting that will support the future kinds of decisions that we want to make.
So that moves us a little bit beyond the question of the demonstration projects.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we want to go there quite yet, but I think it's a question on everyone's mind. And I think we do have to have the discussion of how far can we get together overall, right? And so let's hold that, and let's come back to that topic of conversation. I don't want to let Mike go on that conversation topic. You're just going to let me.
Yeah, earlier, Mike said, these can be costly. Is there a ballpark range, say, that we'll eventually learn about, say, floating constructive wetlands?
Yes.
Do we have any range of cost? And also, if it's done in one site versus another site, is the site specific? Does that factor in on cost factors? How does all that get determined?
That is the next phase, that is exactly the next phase of work. One of the criteria is the dollars per kilogram.
Anticipate, don't we?
We have preliminary stuff right in the spreadsheets. I mean, we have the dollar signs that show you relative cost, and the floating wetlands in each sub-watershed came out about the same. So that answers that question. And it was a range, right? I mean, let me just pull out my notes, because I don't remember off the top of my head. But there's a range in these, for example, in Aries Pond, we have a range of between $5,000 and $10,000 per kilogram for that project. And if you wanted to multiply it by the kilograms, it'll tell you what the dollar value is. So each one of these, you could go in, but if you just, from my own working with this, and not to take up too much time, you can look and say the floating constructed wetlands were about the same amount of money in every watershed. And so were the coastal habitat restoration. There was one aquaculture that was so much cheaper than all the others because it's the existing commercial ones. But for those, and for the PRBs, per linear foot, they're about the same.
So also, just remember those numbers include O&M, right? They're not just the ones in the...
But that's the, and monitoring.
Right, and monitoring. But I'm just saying, if they're thinking about how much they're going to ask for at town meeting to do a project,
Yeah, if we
you're not
could
going to get
come up
20
with-
years of O&M.
We're not asking for money at town meeting to do the demonstration. We're asking for money to budget a demonstration. Because a budget number is a very different thing.
Well,
First, we want to pick a site.
Let me, a couple of comments. I think the budget request in the warrants for FY16 for these demos will include, we have to sit down and look at what's actually required to get a permission for siting, DEP, coordination with the commission, a number of different parties to actually put a shovel in the ground and build a PRB. Some of the timelines for doing that will be shorter. Some will be longer. PRB could be longer, depending upon where it is. There's a number of different things that have to be put in place, including design of those before you can actually implement the demo project. I'm thinking that some of those are going to take more than a year. So the budget for next year will probably include the planning, permitting, design, approval, and everything leading up to FY17, actually putting those projects in place over a 6-month period or whatever it is, such that we then have the 3-year window to monitor. Others may go faster. We may see that we have a site for aquaculture, that the permitting or approval requirements are low, the conditions are good, the access is good, everything falls into place, and we can actually put a project in place quickly, 3-6 months or so, and have it operating by the end of FY16, maybe earlier. But that, we're still trying to feel out now and working with SIA and others on the actual schedule for each one of these to see what falls in 16 and what falls in 17.
Okay, so our last task that we want to make sure we get done today is an overview of the financial analysis. So again, this is the goal, the purpose of this discussion is to give you a sense of where the team is in putting together a model that will help figure out the financial allocations and costing for whatever solution is put in place. And to introduce and start with the time we have, any kind of discussion about really what are the key variables, what are the key places where big decisions are going to have to be made that are going to really affect those allocations in important ways. Okay?
All right. Thanks, Stacy. My name is Doug Gardner, and I'm here to talk about a far less controversial subject than what we've been focusing on today. And that's how to pay for all of this.
Beware.
So, the goal of the financial analysis, it's really quite simple. We're developing a customized, affordable rate structure that's fair and equitable to both the residents and the businesses of Orleans. It'll be based on the full and true value of the water quality management plan. And don't know what this is. Oh yeah, this is the famous flow chart. And since my time is short, I really don't feel that we should go through all this. So I'm just going to go through all this. So creating a value-based rate structure. A lot of factors involved here. How do we go about paying for this? Well, the last thing you actually want to design are the rates. You want to look for all those other sources of revenue that are out there. You're going to look at betterments, both residential and commercial. You'll look at connection fees, tax revenues, septic treatment fees, on-site septic management fees. That's a new term. We'll get into that at some point in the future. But basically, that's going to assess a fee to those who are neither on traditional or non-traditional technology, those with the Title V septic systems. We're going to be looking at zero-interest loans, debt forgiveness, grants, and other affordability provisions. So what I want to do is walk you through the financial model. And it's going to be pretty simple. Not that simple, but it's straightforward. There are no rates projected in this model. I've zeroed everything out. Basically, what we want to do here today is show you the flexibility, the scenarios that we've considered, and also get you thinking to come up with ideas that maybe we haven't and start thinking outside the box. So our first spreadsheet in this model deals with flows. We look at wastewater flows, septic flows, and food waste flows. Now, it was decided early on that food waste flows aren't to be considered, but it's incorporated into the model so that in the future, if that's something you're interested in, it's there for the calculation. So it just makes the program a little more robust, and it's a model that you can use in the future. Now, within each of those flows, we break down the flow based on Orleans, Brewster, and Eastham. We'll come up with percentages of flow for each town, and within each town, we're also going to break that down a little bit further and look at residential flow, commercial flow, industrial flow, and then other. The model will allow flows to increase, decrease as years go on. If the flows increase for one town and decrease for the other, that's going to change the percentages. Those percentages are carried through the entire model. So you change a percentage here, it's going to go through to all the other calculations as well. So in an interest of time, I'm going to jump. Oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, you have a 3-page document that was handed out or sent to you earlier in the week. Each spreadsheet is summarized by number on this handout, so you can follow along as we go through this. second spreadsheet in our model is the water, is the sewer budget. And within the sewer budget, we've looked at the direct costs. Direct costs comprised of personnel costs. So if you were to create a wastewater department here in Orleans, there are positions for a superintendent, for a chief operator, for office staff, for laborers, for clerical staff, for the lab, seasonal employees. Fringe benefits are calculated at 35%. That is health insurance, life insurance, retirement, all the hidden costs that the town carries. There's continuing education in here. Then we jump into the operations and maintenance costs. The purchase of water, engineering, equipment replacement, equipment rental, all the chemicals, the oil, the gas, everything, all the expenses that it takes to keep this department running. Now, should you choose to go with contract operations, all these lines will not pertain, but there's a separate line item for contract ops. It's just 1 or 2 lines versus 15 or 20 different lines. So we have a summary for the operation and maintenance costs. We factored in septage, transportation, and disposal costs, food waste costs, should you choose to go that way in the future. We've looked at capital. Capital both in terms of capital that will be bonded and capital that's funded through cash or reserves. So non-debt and debt. We have the indirect costs incorporated. Those are the supporting fees from the departments within the town that aid the proposed sewer department. Then we get into the debt service, and we have 2 categories here. What portion of the debt will be funded by the town, and what portion of the debt will be funded by the customer. Lastly, we have reserves, and when you add all those together, that gives you your total operating budget, both for what I would call short-term and long-term costs.
Doug, are you
Yes.
going to put allocated costs from other departments that spend time on this issue in there?
You mean like a full indirect cost study? We could.
Or simple allocation?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Now, the numbers for the debt service, they're calculated later in the program. They all funnel back to the debt service budget. This is going to this document will determine how much money you need to raise, both through other fees, sewer fees, septage fees, betterments, et cetera, et cetera. It's your total budget. It's how much you need to raise on an annual basis.
Doug?
Yes.
Just taking off from Josh's question, I think you should set this up as an enterprise fund?
That's how it is set up.
Well, but all of those other costs would be a part of that? That would be the framework that we're looking at? So
Yes,
from a town standpoint, whether it's a contract or town staff, as an enterprise fund, the goal is to have it self-sufficient.
And it is.
Okay.
I do have a line item in there for the indirect costs.
Okay.
They're called indirect and administrative.
Right.
I just have it as a plug number. Based on Josh's comments, I'll put an allocation table in
Yeah,
there.
it just kind of shows some of the things that go into that. Right.
Okay. No problem there. To show a little bit of what we can do, all of those costs within the sewer department, there are going to be a couple major functions, wastewater and septage. So we can allocate a portion of each position, each expense throughout the budget for a portion for wastewater and a portion for septage. Right now, I just have it at 100% for wastewater, but the ability is there to get into more detail. Here is a copy of an outdated hybrid plan. This is from probably about a month ago. But we have each project broken down by sub-watershed. We've identified the number of parcels involved. We've broken down each project into one of 4 phases. Some projects will carry over from one phase to another. We have the capital costs incorporated, the annual O&M, the annual monitoring costs, giving you the total annual cost, and then we have the present worth O&M and the present worth of the capital. These numbers here will flow into various worksheets. For example, the capital costs will be incorporated into our bonding or our debt sheets, and I'll get to that in a minute. The annual O&M costs, those will flow back to the sewer department budget. So if we make a change to the O&M, say it goes from 17,000 to 20,000, it's going to make a change throughout the whole program. So pretty easy to run some, what-if scenarios and see what the effect will be. And I'm sorry I'm going through these a little quickly, but my time is limited. This spreadsheet here is the capital plan summary. Right now, I only have 4 line items in here. This is the hybrid plan split into 4 different phases. If I go up above, I can break down all the traditional technology. Below that, I can break down the non-traditional technology, take a portion of each, and it will flow down into the hybrid. We just don't have that information available, so I just wanted to show you the summary. Now here we get into the debt service. Up in column D, row 5, and D6, we have what portion of the debt will be funded through the tax rate and what portion of the debt will be funded through the rates or user fees. I have the hybrid plan broken down into four different bonds right now. How many there will actually be is to be determined, but for simplicity's sake, 4 different bonded projects split out over 5 years. So your first bond is 2020, 2025, 2030, 2035. You can see that the first bond's around $37 million. Your payment would be $1,850,000. The next spreadsheet will show how that number is actually calculated. But as we move out,
The 75-25, that's a number, that's a percentage that'll be determined by the town.
Absolutely.
Just run with that, just
Yeah.
for-
Yeah, I could have made it 80-20. It could be 70-30. I think a lot of it will depend on what the numbers work out to be. And there's going to be an affordability decision that needs to be made of how much do we want to fund through the tax rate, how much do we want to fund through the user rate.
And Doug, this would be after consideration of potential grants for debt forgiveness and other private investment or something like that.
Well, I have that incorporated into the spreadsheet, and maybe I should have started there first and worked my way back, but it's easy to move the spreadsheets once we get along further in the process. But yes, what I'm showing you here is full cost, 100%. That bond is not reduced by any kind of grant, any kind of debt forgiveness. That's the true cost. And that number, and I also wanted to show you an important metric here. You can see, here's the town-funded portion of each bond. So of the $1,849,905, roughly $1.4 million will be funded through the tax rate. The customer will fund, or the user will fund, 460-some-odd thousand. Now, what effect does that have to me? These are just big numbers. They really don't mean anything. I've put in a calculation that how will the tax rate be affected. So this bond, based on a 75-25 split, based on the current valuation, will affect the tax rate by 42 cents per $1,000. And what does that actually mean in hard dollars? If someone has a house that's owns a home that's assessed at $500,000, that'll be a $208 increase. If your home's worth $600,000 or assessed for $600,000, that'll add $250 to your annual tax bill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, these are real numbers. That's how it's going to affect you.
In this hypothetical case.
And it's hypothetical. No hugs and kisses yet. These are just numbers.
Why we didn't hand it out.
So, and as we go on through each year, you can see that it affects the rate by 42 cents until we get to 2025, when there's another large bond that you have to start paying for, and that adds an additional X number of dollars to the tax rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way out. Now, how did we come up with the amount of principal for each bond? We have some amortization schedules that we've developed. We plug in the amount of the bond, $36,998,000. We are assuming a 0% tax bond. SRF 0%, 20 years. Just to note, if we had to pay 2% interest rate on roughly $130, $140 million worth of debt, it's about $30 million. So every percentage point less that we pay, or we pay above 0, adds a significant amount of money to this project. So it's critical that we get a bond, hopefully for 0%, but try to keep that number as low as possible, because it really escalates the costs. And this is a pretty simple calculation. It's just principal divided by 20, since there's no interest involved. The payment, the principal's here. These numbers carry back to the debt schedule and carry back to the budget.
I have a question. Is there a limit to how much money is out there at the 0%?
Oh, there's always a limit. I don't know what that number is, though.
It's not limitless, though.
No.
I think the way it's set up is that there is a certain percentage that would be available out of the entire amount that would be authorized for the SRF for any given year. I think it's 30% that is available for 0%. So you're competing
It's
within that.
competitive, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The total amount available will vary year by year, so 30% of that available amount is, of course, going to vary year by year.
And these, I should note that these are just projections. And, you know, when you actually go to set your rates on a yearly basis, you have to base those on current and real information. You know, these are projections to give you an idea of where you're going.
Hypothetical projections.
Hypothetical projections.
It's also to demonstrate the functionality of the model. So it just, we needed to give Doug some picture of what a project might look like. So we gave him the cost of the hybrid solution. We broke it into phases for him over 5 years for each phase. And so he was able to basically proof out his model using those numbers.
Okay. The reserves, we factored in reserves here. We're looking at repair and replacement reserves. We have debt service requirement reserves, operating fund reserves, working capital reserves. Every dollar we add in reserves adds more to the bottom line, results in higher rates, so there'll be decisions that need to be made here to determine what level of reserves we want to carry. If you're enterprise fund, you probably want to carry a little bit higher reserve than if you were non-enterprise. But again, these are decisions that need to be made. We build the reserves into the spreadsheet. They carry back throughout the entire spreadsheet and will affect the rate one way or the other. This spreadsheet, which I call OFS, stands for Other Funding Sources, other financing sources, whatever you want to call it. We've tried to incorporate as many different sources as possible: the Brewster buy-in, the Eastham buy-in, septage revenue, septage impact fee, food waste. Some you may use, some you may not. We're looking at grants and reserve funding and connection fees and energy sales, interest income, penalty, betterments, et cetera, et cetera. If there's anything we missed, we can just add another line and it'll carry through. So anything we can raise here will ultimately keep the rate down as we go forward. Again, this is what we want to look at. Where are all the other sources of revenue that we need that will ultimately keep the rate down? Now we get into the important rate calculation. And what we have here is, I have it broken down by wastewater, septage, and food waste. And again, by each town: Orleans, Brewster, Eastham. And if it's 0, then for Brewster and Eastham, then the percentage is 100% to Orleans. But here we have our total expenses. Here we have the other funding sources. Here's the amount of revenue we need to generate. And I'm going to go out to a real number. So 2020. Fictitious hypothetical budget of $2.6 million. Other funding sources of $1.7 million means we need to raise $926,000 through the user rate. And the user rate could comprise of a couple different sources. The sale of wastewater, so the flow, and then a base charge or a flat fee. So I've incorporated both in here. Again, I've zeroed out what the user rate is. I don't want to start a panic or make the 6 o'clock news. So we've zeroed everything out. Again, I'm just trying to show you the functionality of the program. We'll have ample opportunity to go over the real numbers, and you guys can have at me then. But we're looking at wastewater flows. And it's important to note that the wastewater flow shouldn't be calculated at 100%. You're never going to collect 100% of what you bill. So right now I have a factor in of 95%, which may even be too optimistic. But we can change that number. The lower the collection rate, the higher the rate needs to be. Short term, your collection rate is usually lower, and as people get used to it, it increases. So here, column C12, this is the wastewater flow. This comes from the flow summary. Down below, we have the number of parcels. I obtained this information directly from the assessor's office, so it should be pretty accurate. And over here. Then we have the Orleans annual user charge. That's going to be the flat rate that the customer will pay on an annual or semi-annual basis, quarterly basis, however it's determined. Now, one of the key metrics that we want to look at is based on the median household income here in Orleans, which I have set at around $37,000. According to studies, the affordability rate for Massachusetts is 2% of the MHI for each utility. So 2% of the $37,000 annually works out to be $745. So that means if the user charges are less than $745, according to the state, you can pay more. If it's above, you're paying too much. And for comparison's sakes, I also put in the MHI for the average Commonwealth town. And that's considerably higher. It's really, it's almost twice Orleans's MHI. So these are just metrics to compare what you're going to pay to standards that are out there. It doesn't compare to other communities around you. It's basically just a metric to give you an idea of how affordable it is, I guess, according to the state or in a perfect world. And I have the rates also calculated for wastewater, for Brewster, Eastham. We get down into the septage. I have no problem showing you this number because it's a pretty accurate and accepted number of 9 cents per gallon. And I've got Brewster calculated, Eastham calculated, and food service, food waste is 0. And lastly, how do I know these numbers actually prove? I've developed something called the proof of revenue. And what I have are the different factors that are out there, calculating the rates by the flow to come up with the total revenue offset against what the projected expenses are. So there are 2 columns. Column D is for flow-related revenue. Column E is for fixed charges. So in 2016, you've got some septic. It'll generate $1.2 million. Other funding sources of $500,000. Again, these are just fictitious numbers. That means the revenue generated will be $1,521,000. The budget is $1,521,000 approves. Now, if we go out to 2020, at one point this number did prove, but because I zeroed everything out, it now does not. So you can see there's no revenue based on this 1,049 parcels. And these parcels come directly from the sub-watershed totals that Stantec has been calculating. And you can see we're only generating 2.7 million. Our expenses are 3.6, so we've got a deficit of 926,000. Hypothetically. Yeah. So, I condensed an hour into about 20 minutes. I know I went fast. But again, I'm just trying to expose this to you. We can get into it in a lot more detail in future meetings, which I'm sure we will. The information, I think Josh wants to say something.
One of the strengths or one of the utilities of this model is that it will allow us to investigate the likelihood of, for example, specific things like a cluster system being able to operate at the same cost or an roughly equivalent cost of the central system. That seems to be one of the main reasons that we have today, because we can go back and, for example, make the costs equivalent, and then look at the assumptions that we made to make those costs equivalent, which will allow us to arrive at a risk assessment of whether or not those costs could in fact be equivalent. That's a big strength of this model. The second thing is that the Finance Committee is going to work with the financial team in coming up with graphs and charts that demonstrate, under certain assumptions, what the specific metrics are for various scenarios here. If anyone here has specific things that they would like to see included in those metrics, that we will show a range of, please let us know.
So to add to that, Doug has been working closely with Josh and with the Finance Committee as he goes. So you just heard the very quick overview, but they have been sitting down and really working through this with the Finance Committee. They've been sort of taking the lead role in really reviewing this for the panel. Any initial comments about the model? Forget the numbers in the model for now, they're hypothetical, but the model, the components of the model, all of that. Looks good.
Yeah,
Wow.
Looks good on the surface, just.
And
We talk colors? No red.
Okay, good.
Red.
Good.
Thank you.
Next steps, do you want to say what the next steps are?
the next steps with financial analysis are basically, even though the hybrid is still under configuration, it's still being jostled back and forth, is to take the hybrid as it is now and do a time series of expenditures, capital and operating over time, including planning, design whether it's for a cluster system, whether it's for Tri-Town, or whether it's for a PRB, and put that in, and then Doug runs that real case through the model with a list of assumptions, and assumptions on interest rates, assumptions on the 75-25, which again is totally hypothetical.
You should tell people, Mike, that you rip it apart after I send it to you.
And basically see what that comes out. And then the hard tasks start, is we start going in and saying, okay, how can we reduce costs? How can we spread costs out? What if this doesn't happen? Is there something else we can do with different financing terms? We start turning the knobs on the radio to get this to where we agree that it's affordable and the value, it's worth the value that we're getting in terms of water quality benefits. So that's the process before us over the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And it's a big task. Typically, there's not many questions at this stage. A month from now, all your hands will be up. And that's great, because that's the process.
Any final comments from the panel? Final comments from
I do have a question with regard to the financial analysis. Will we have access to this just to be able to see these spreadsheets? Because my bifocals don't work very well from the back row. Can we at least see, knowing that these are dummy numbers, just to see how they work? Are they going to be posted on the website?
We haven't really even thought about that yet, Lynn. The model really, although Doug says I've ripped it apart, I really haven't yet. And I'm not even a financial person. We have to have
But
other...
many of us are, but...
Yeah, well, when it's QC'd and ready to go, we can have this discussion. At this point here, it's premature.
So, for example, in the area on capital plan summary, and I was trying hard to see, there's a chart labeled Tri-Town, and the chart labeled Tri-Town, and I believe this was the capital plan summary. It listed all the sub-watersheds, and there were costs listed for all the sub-watersheds as though there were capital costs that applied to each of the sub-watersheds that applied to Tri-Town, which looked to me as though there were Tri-Town specific costs for each sub-watershed, and yet I thought that very few of the sub-watersheds actually were having wastewater going to Tri-Town.
Let me explain
so
that.
clearly it's a curiosity.
Let me explain that. Number one, as Gary said, the model's produced for functionality only at this point. Number two, we have kept Doug completely in the dark, really, about whether it's a PRB, where it goes, whether it's sewer, whatnot. He's put numbers in and allocated them really, not pejoratively at all, in ignorance, because they're not real numbers. we have not really engaged in, as I said, putting in a real chart yet that reflects the hybrid plan as it now stands. Those don't reflect the hybrid plan.
So then, again, to want to be able to see the model, to be able to see the moving parts of the model, to be able to get a sense that all the components are included is certainly a curiosity that
Sure.
many of us would have.
And that's, in your comment just now, in your question about why these here, is exactly why it's not available yet, because it's not real.
Okay. So, and
What we'll do, I would defer to, of course, the selectmen, town administrator, FinCom, and others, as to having the QC on this model done by the town before it's spread out to
the members of the panel, for example.
maybe, that'll be discussed, I'm sure.
Thanks. And I'd say, Doug, an awesome job. I know what your allocated budget was, and I think you've exceeded it based on putting this together.
Oh, thanks. I'll ask for a change order.
I don't think that's anything possible, but just on the rate calculation tab, and again, Josh, you might, knowing this is a model, you don't know what the rate setting board will actually use, but it's only looking at comparatives to, affordability. And I did suggest this to Mike a number of months ago, that I think you really should provide for different rate structure capability. I'm not saying it'll be provided, but do build in a low-income rate that would be subsidized. Do build in a consumption-based or a usage-based capability that could be shifting. You want that in the model, whether or not you turn that feature on, but build it in if you have the hours left to do it.
That's a very good point, and we'll make sure the hours are available to do that. That's critical. And a rate stabilization fund, there's other factors that go into this that go along with it, right?
Any other public comments? Anything else from the panel?
Then I guess we can move to adjourn.
moved. Second.
All in favor?
Thank you, everyone. Be here for the next one.